at Ingredion, and then at Sara Lee, where he was in charge of investor relations. And unfortunately, however, he never had my class. However, this is not payback time. What I can tell you is that Aaron and I share something that is perhaps makes us the way we are right now, because we both have had backgrounds in history before we did what we did. So we are extremely happy to have you, Aaron, and we look forward to the experiences with learning all about what you've done as you've gone up the ladder to the senior vice presidency. Ernest, could I have you introduce someone now?
Absolutely. I'm going to take Mike McGrew second. And as Nancy said, you know, one of the great things about what we put together tonight is that you've got a bunch of IMC grads. And oh, by the way, I was in Nancy's class as well. As a matter of fact, Aaron 95, I'm 96, Mike's 97. Those were 3 great years that I repeated. Anyway, it's really great to be here with the professionals, and for you that are listening in today that are in our IMC class or alumni, to realize that we are represented well in the workforce and community of professionals coming out of IMC, and that's really important. Mike McGrew is currently the Executive Vice President for Constellation Brands, Executive Vice President, Chief Communications and CSR Officer. He reports directly to the President and the CEO, and hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. He's responsible for overseeing all aspects of the company's communications, including internal, external, brand, public relations, corporate branding, reputation, IR, corporate social responsibility. And oh, by the way, if he didn't have enough to do, his role was expanded and he's now the Chief Diversity Officer. And so Mike certainly is well represented in the company at the top of the leadership level. And so Mike, welcome to you. And I had the privilege of working with Mike professionally as well as with Sara, and I have been enriched by it. So welcome to you today.
Great to be here, Ernest. Thanks.
So let me bring up the final panelist that we're going to introduce today, Sara Granack. Sara also took my investor relations class, and then she, in a moment of probable weakness, she actually took an independent study, which was on the investor relations and the growing importance of a CSR publication. And so Sara has had a lot of experience. I've known Sara, graduated, and was delighted when she joined our Grainger team, and is now working as the Vice President for Corporate Communications for CDW, and it's great for us because CDW was just down the road from where Grainger was many years ago when I worked there. So Sara actually has a perfect background, by the way, for investor relations, Aaron. She actually worked for a bank, and before joining Grainger, and then of course CDW. So Sara is not only is she a very busy lady in her job, where she is in charge of all communications for CDW, but she also is a very busy lady in her free time, and I'm sure that's precious time indeed. But she is chair of the board of Bernie's Book Bank, and also Leadership Advisory Council for Regina Dominican High School. And Sara, welcome to you, and perhaps I'll eventually get you into the IR world.
There's still time. Thank you, Nancy. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So what I thought we could do today is just to start off with some questions to get our topic that we want to talk about. And I guess I'm going to start off with my first question. I'm going to ask Mike because I've actually worked with Mike both at Morton International and at Grainger. Mike, actually, I hired him straight out of the program, and so I want to ask Mike, what was the best and the worst career decisions that you have made?
Well, hopefully you don't regret that decision, Nance. I'll let you answer that after the fact. But it was honestly, one, thank you for the opportunities you've afforded me. In particular, the first opportunity coming out of the IMC program. So best and worst decisions. There are many. It's hard to whittle them down. I think one of the best decisions that I made in my career was actually the move from Grainger to Constellation Brands. Now, let me explain that, because I loved my time at Grainger. I spent 13 years of my career there. I kind of came up with others, including Sara, and under the tutelage of Nancy and Ernest as part of that experience. And to me, that was building the foundation of this house that I called a career. And without that experience, I would not have been ready for what was next. I reached a point in my career where I'd done a variety of different rotations. I was no longer felt like I was growing or progressing to my ultimate goal. It was like different flavors of the same stuff, and I was becoming comfortable. And I think that's very, very dangerous in a career. When you become comfortable, it can allow complacency to set in. And so I needed a new challenge. And for all of us, we're the only ones that really own our careers. And so while I wasn't necessarily looking, an opportunity presented itself, and it just so happened to be an opportunity where it matched all the different things that I was looking for, right? Because you can't be solely motivated by title or money. For me, it was, how is this set of experiences going to be progressive in terms of where I'm trying to go in my career? My aspiration was always to be a chief communications officer for a Fortune 500 company. And so this got me out of B2B into B2C, into a fast moving dynamic company where I was faced with new challenges, but I could also bring some experiences to the table that added some value to what the business was going through. And, it was just the right situation. And my career in the six and a half years I've been there has flourished. It's been a blessing, truly a blessing. The experience at Grainger was also a blessing, but it just, it kind of taught me a couple different things, which is, you've got to be willing to take risks in your career in order to continue to progress and reach your ultimate goal. So I think that was one of the best decisions. I think one of the worst decisions, I'm going to get personal with you for a moment. At one point with Grainger, I relocated to Atlanta. I had a 2-year-old son and a baby that was about maybe 2 months old. And we relocate. We didn't, our family was based in Chicago, relocated to Atlanta, excited about the new job. I'm all in. And, the household items have been delivered. House is full of boxes. The next day I jumped on a plane, went to San Francisco for business. If I had to do it all over again, I would have done that differently. I was one of the biggest boneheaded mistakes. I thought at the time it was the right thing to do, but keeping things in proper balance, I think is an important lesson to learn throughout the course of your career. So that was probably one of the worst decisions I've made. Just one. There are many, but that was what I wanted to share.
So let me jump in. Thanks, Mike, for that answer. Just to give our audience, because we really have two key objectives, as Nancy and I talked about putting this together. Number one, how do we leverage you guys as it relates to where you are professionally and what you're seeing out in the world and the challenges that you're faced with there? And then the other thing for those that are attending today, for them to be able to get your insight in terms of how you view professionals, specifically coming out of the IMC program, or those that you're looking to hire. So those, those will be constant themes as we go along. But could each of you take just about 2 minutes and give us a quick snapshot of your kind of career path, just very quickly? Aaron, let's start with you, please.
Sure. So I didn't get the best and worst decision, but apparently the worst decision was not working at Grainger because everyone else on this panel did. So I guess I'm the outlier in that sense.
Aaron. There's
There's
still
still
time.
time. I'm good at the end of the road here. Yeah, I mean, so like Nancy said, my original intention was, as an undergrad was to be a history professor. My mom was a college professor and that was very appealing to me. And what I really wanted to do was teach, and ended up in a PhD program in American history, a really good one, and realized pretty quickly that wasn't what I wanted to do, and stumbled upon this thing at Northwestern called the Integrated Marketing Communications Program, and managed to somehow get accepted to come up and do that. So that was tremendous. And along the way, despite not taking Nancy's IR class, I had a summer job doing investor relations, of course. And that was a real turning point for me in figuring out this was something that appealed to me and suited me. And so I was able to go out and graduate and find a job at a really small company that had just gone public, and start to learn how to do this job. And then through a series of other companies have gotten to progress, do different industries under, been through a whole lot of crazy market events just in the past 5 years, and certainly a lot of things, but in 25 years we've seen an awful lot. So just I think that's the progression.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
So I grew up in Canada, in Toronto, and I was a poli-sci undergraduate with aspirations of going to law school, and I was working in banking because that's what my family did. And so I was working my way through undergrad at a bank and feeling like I had a nice career path ahead of me in banking, but it didn't really excite me in a meaningful way. So I was doing some research for a professor who introduced me to the head of public affairs at Harris Bank. And through a series of conversations, he introduced me to the IMC program. And I remember coming down for a information session and just feeling like I had met my people. And so I came through IMC, and I do have to take this moment to just thank Nancy for her guidance. The fact that a teacher would have an independent study and meet a student individually every Saturday morning, it changed my life. So thank you, Nancy. So post-graduation, I had the opportunity to take a role at Grainger. And I remember thinking that it was in the suburbs. It wasn't very glamorous. It felt very like a big departure from where I had sort of pitched myself as a urban woman. But Nancy, at the time, I remember you giving me advice that B2B has really complicated, complex, intellectually stimulating problems to solve. And there's a lot of opportunity there. So I made the leap to get my NAFTA visa to immigrate here and join the Grainger team. And like Mike, had a huge number of opportunities throughout my career at Grainger that made me the communications professional that I am today. But 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to get my dream role, which is leading the function at CDW, which is there's some similarities between CDW and Grainger that made for a little bit less of a risky move, but an entirely new industry. It's been a lot of fun, and I know we'll get into this later, but I think it's a really challenging, stimulating time to be head of comms. And so there's never a dull moment, and I think I'm learning and growing every day. So
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, so I went to undergrad and graduate school at Northwestern, and that's where I had an opportunity on a football scholarship, by the way. So I tried to get as much out of that scholarship and that opportunity as I felt the athletic program was getting out of us, quite frankly, because we were part of a team that kind of led the resurgence of the program, and that attracted not only prospective students, but a lot of funding from donors. So I think we were doing our part, but I love the university. The IMC program was the first time that I felt like I was learning, being rooted in things that really spoke to me. when Sarah says, found my people, it was kind of the sense that, yeah, that this stuff's mentally stimulating. I enjoy the communication aspect and the many different facets of that apply to a corporation. Essentially, I didn't know a lot of that existed prior to my exposure to the program. So I felt very fortunate. I kind of fell into a pot of gold, if you will. And I've been in this field for a little over 20 years, worked for 4 different companies in a variety of different industries, salt and specialty chemicals, food service, industrial supplies, and now beverage alcohol. I've had the opportunity to work in corporate headquarters, field communication-based roles, exposure to international business, which has been fascinating for a kid from the south suburbs of Chicago that never really got exposed to any of that in his life. Worked for public companies, private companies, B2B, B2C, variety of different experiences along the way. And so, now I'm 6.5 years in at Constellation Brands. For those that don't know the company, we are one of the biggest beverage alcohol companies in the country. Our sales are primarily US. We do have operations in New Zealand, Italy, Mexico. You've probably heard of some of our beer and wine and spirits brands, Corona, Modelo, Pacifico, or on the beer side, The Prisoner, Kim Crawford, Mayomi, The Prisoner on the wine side, High West Whiskey, Svedka, Vodka on the spirit side. So highly regulated industry, very dynamic industry. There's lots happening. Very popular industry in a pandemic, apparently. So people still like to enjoy and imbibe. So I'm part of the executive management team there. I'm very blessed to be so. But IMC really set the foundation for that.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask my one question, kick it back over to Nancy. Sarah, look, the world's gone crazy in the last couple of years. There's a lot of societal trends, things that are going on. What are the big ones that are impacting your business, and talk to us about how they've affected you guys?
Yeah, I think you teed that up exactly right. There's a lot going on, and I think like many companies, historically CDW has been very reluctant to speak out on societal issues and has been very operationally focused. Let's control what we can control and focus on that. I think that like many other companies, the last year has really changed our norms in that way, and we really leaned in last year to our responsibility to create dialogue among our coworkers first and foremost, and support everyone dealing with the challenges that we're all dealing with in 2020, and George Floyd's murder and the conversations that really evoked, I think, opened up an entirely new set of conversations at the certainly at the executive level, but across the company, that have been really positive, and I think have driven a different level of empathy across coworkers, but also a different level of openness around our role more broadly in societal issues. And so I would be lying if I said we have this figured out. I mean, as recently as last week, we've been having conversations around basically mapping out from a materiality standpoint, what are those societal issues where CDW has a role to play in the public discourse, and how do we identify those and get ahead of them so that when situations arise, we're not seen as reactive and jumping on bandwagon of conversation. It's like we're part of the conversation ahead of time because we're thought leaders in that space. So CDW is a technology distributor, and there's no shortage of issues facing the technology space, anything from ethical use of AI to facial recognition software. There's a lot of those conversations that we are really leaning into as a leadership team around our stance, our beliefs, and really going back to our values as guiding us in all of those conversations. I guess I would just summarize, though, that the nature of these types of discussions has really changed over the last year, and it's challenging, but I think really critical work, and we're making progress. We're not there yet, but we're making good progress.
Thank you. Nance?
So I'm going to ask a question of Aaron, and that is one of the questions I used to hate when I worked in investor relations was what keeps you up at night. But I think that to a degree, the question really probes at what's the big issues that you're facing and your company is facing. This is similar to what Sara says, but from a different angle, of course, because as the head of investor relations, you don't get involved in some of the issues that she talked about. What would you say is in that realm as you think about going forward? What keeps TransUnion up at night?
Sure. Well, there's the normal course of business items. Most notably in our industry, it's cybersecurity threat. And that had always been, I was told people that was risk factor number 1 through 10 pretty much for our company. We are stewards of some of the most important and most powerful data in the world about consumers, both in the United States and in countries around the world. So cyber incidents are a problem. We saw that with one of our 2 primary competitors in 2017. Equifax had a very substantial data breach, and we saw the damage that inflicted on their company, on our industry, and put a lot of scrutiny on our industry. All the CEOs had to testify in front of Congress. That looked pretty painstaking and pretty painful. I got to watch. I didn't have to be a part of it, of course, but we saw how that works. So there's always normal course of business that we worry a lot about. But I think more and more those factors are dovetailing what investors care about and what other stakeholders care about, really in the vein that the question for Sara speaks to. And I used to be the person who would tell you, ESG was Europeans and sort of on the cursory, et cetera. And I'd say in the past 2 years, it's accelerated. And in the past 1 year, it's been turbocharged, right? Like, I think leading into the pandemic, you could feel the tidal wave coming, and we were getting ready for it. Last year, the dam broke, right? The tidal wave smashed through. And so, we led a series of our earnings calls over the past year, really, I think the final 3 of the year, with social justice oriented commentary from our CEO, which is very much from, and it was cool because I get to write that stuff for him, but I also know him well. I know it's very much what he's passionate about, and it comes from his heart. And we took pretty strong stands on a number of issues. We've done a lot of the soul searching and the internal work that Sara was describing, whether it's unconscious bias training up and down the organization, creation of appointment of a chief diversity officer for the first time, formation of a task force for racial equity, which has a very broad purview, both for our associates, our communities, as well as the data that we employ. And what difference does that make? Because there's a lot of positive benefits of the data we have, but we have to make sure there are no unintended negative consequences. So we have to be sort of a ombudsman for our own data. And investors increasingly care about these topics to the point that I'm very closely aligned with our Office of Sustainability and having a real voice in how we message and how we think about our reporting, et cetera. Last year, we conducted ESG specific outreach with our top 20 shareholders. Conversation wasn't about you should invest in TransUnion, it's you're invested. Let's have a conversation about what's on your mind, understand what we're doing, understand concerns you have, make sure we create the start of a dialogue. We'll likely extend that outreach to the top 30, top 40 potentially this coming year. And it was extraordinarily well received. So, there's a whole world out there that is now a new challenge. It's a great challenge because it makes a difference in a lot of positive ways, and something I think I personally am very passionate about. So that's been a big challenge. It doesn't keep me up at night, I guess, but it certainly creates a new vector for what we have to think about in the world of investor relations.
Thank you, Aaron, for that. I could see that you're kind of trying to keep Pandora's box closed, because if you were to just expand on any one of those, we could be here for quite a time. It's carries that level of complexity. Nancy and I tried to stay away from the questions where everybody has to answer, right? But the next one I'm about to ask, if you have something that's different, Mike, I want to start off with you. But a large part of our audience tonight are IMC students that are about to matriculate, and they're trying to figure out, what does their next role look like? They're trying to figure out, what are the companies looking for, what are professionals and leaders looking for in those employees and team members that they will hire. Mike, start us out. What's going to differentiate potential employees in your mind from the others that contribute, and what are you looking for as a professional? I can remember those times where I'm sitting, at a desk interviewing somebody almost every week, right? So you got a lot of talent coming by you. What are the things that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm talking to a bunch of communicators here, so this might seem a little weird, but the biggest thing that we look for are business leaders, people that have a degree of business acumen, right? That don't come in just as the functional expert, that take the time to understand the interworkings of the business, our strategic priorities, and then take that unique lens of communications and stakeholder management and apply that to what the business is trying to achieve, to engage our leaders in business discussions first, and then be seen as functional experts that bring a unique perspective second. I think that's the biggest thing I talk to my team about. That is the biggest thing that I think has, this is going to sound trite, but won us hearts and minds. It gets us a seat at the table. There are too many functional support personnel across the business that are somewhat disconnected from the realities of the business. And when all you do is bring your functional orientation to a discussion, but it's not in tune with how the leaders of the business think, the issues that they're grappling with, and when your solutions or perspective are applied in a way that doesn't solve for what they're going through, like, we're here to support the business, the leaders of the business, and what they're grappling with. And so I think that is first and foremost. And when you do that, I think you show up as a consummate team player, somebody that puts the team and the business ahead of personal agenda or preference, and you can actually help advance the ball. So that's the biggest thing that I think we look for, and that I look for, is I need somebody that's really in tune with the business, can be a great teammate, and can figure out how to solve our most challenging problems and help advance the ball, leveraging our unique perspective.
I don't have a lot to say other than amen. I mean, like, Mike, you could not, like, every word you spoke, I wish had come out of my mouth, that probably some of them would have. That is the number one thing I see, not just in our field, but in any field. It is so frustrating to me internally to run across people who have no idea fundamentally what we do, but they want to tell you about their functional role and be the expert in that. And I always say, if you're if you're an HR person, be a great business person first, be an HR person second, and apply that. So amen, hallelujah, and hell yeah. So that's awesome.
To me, I think I echo everything that's been said. To me, the indicators when you're interviewing somebody for those attributes, they've taken the time to listen to earnings calls. They've read the analyst reports. They've not only looked at the website, but they ask thoughtful questions that show that they can connect dots, that they see a bigger picture, that they're able to reflect back their insights. They're well read, intellectually curious. Those are markers to me of a communications professional that thinks beyond their role and can contribute right away in a meaningful way that's larger than being able to write a good message, which obviously matters, but it's not everything.
Well, I think that's a terrific way for us to kind of segue into perhaps seeing if there are questions in our audience that we can get. And Matt, are you going to be the person who's going to help us?
I can read them, Nance. I've got the board up. I can see.
Okay.
So guys, if you're out there in the audience, we have a robust audience on tonight. You've heard a little bit about these professionals and what they do. We've delved into a few areas, whether it's your interest in, hey, how am I going to get my next job? Or you're interested in what's really happening in the real world. They're solving the problems that we have today that are going on. And as they admitted, they don't necessarily have all the answers, but I think we could have a great dialogue. So please go to your chat box, put the message in there, and we'll get the questions up before our panelists. Nancy, while we're compiling that, if you wanted to just, oh, wait a minute, there's the Q&A. Okay. Okay, first question from Chris. And please place in your question if you want it to go to anyone specifically. If not, guys, just jump in as you see fit. Not sure if this was asked, but what key experience or experiences or skills will the next generation of leaders need to acquire or get to the level, the higher level of an organization? And that comes to us from Chris Garcia.
I'll start, not maybe have you guys chime in. So I, you know, my perspective, and this is one of the things I talked to my, and kind of some of this is dependent upon what the ultimate destination for you is. For me, I always want to be a chief communications officer. One of the things that was most important to me, there's two aspects. There's gaining perspective about your trade, right? And so one of the things that was a huge benefit for me was over the course of my career, and it's a journey, you got to enjoy the journey and appreciate the journey, because it can help prepare you for the decisions that you need to make and the judgment you need to have later in life. But you know, I had roles where, you know, the focus was internal, external, dealt with issues and crises, international, a little dabbling of IR, a little dabbling of CSR, you know, out in field operations, corporate. So, you know, and all of that gets you exposed to different elements of business, different problems, corporate branding as a, for instance, that you need to solve for. And it helps build your, I think, you know, sets of experience. It helps you earn stripes because you have to come through under pressure based upon different challenges that you're faced with. And I think it makes you a more well-rounded professional. That's on the you know, functional expertise kind of side. And you know, the accumulation of business acumen. On the other side, this is something that people don't talk much or as much about as they should. But we spend a lot of time on it. It's the people side of the business. Because as a great leader once said to me, the game is all about people. Everything else is just detail, right? And so understanding things like, you know, emotional intelligence, yourself, what triggers you, how you react in certain situations, social intelligence, the impact that you have on others, and being able to read that along the way and adapt your style in the moment based upon the impact that you feel you're having or not having. Understanding of group dynamics and the ability to navigate politically, and where the power bases and landmines in the organization are and how to navigate that and see around corners. The ability to understand how to influence others when they're not starting out in the same place that you are and they don't have the same perspective that you have. I think the people side of the business, understanding that, becoming great at that is just as important as the functional expertise side. And it takes a lifetime of experiences to build a strong foundation for that house, that career that you're building. Because if you don't spend the time, invest the time accumulating that and building strong muscle, at some point you run the risk of you getting exposed, and you do not want that. So, you know, for me, I've coached and counseled different leaders, and I was one of these at a certain point in my career. Y'all want to advance fast. For me, at one point in my career, I did not respect or appreciate all the things that you need to learn and experience and develop along the path of journey. I had an inflated view of self, which a sense of healthy ego is not all bad. But if you go too far too fast, at some point you're going to get exposed and that house can crumble. And so I say appreciate the journey, but there are a variety of different things, particularly if you're going to sit as a CCO, that you've got to accumulate over the years that I think will make you very sound, a sound leader for the business, but also in developing those that you lead and that come behind you.
You know, I think I'll just add to that, that as I reflect on my career, one of the turning points for me, because I think I had the opposite issue where I was lacking confidence at many junctures of my career and not necessarily feeling like I was capable for the next role. But one of the most meaningful things I did was my nonprofit board service. And I think what that served me was sitting at a table with a diverse group of leaders from different industries, very accomplished professionals, where I showed up as just an executive, not a communications professional. And it was very empowering to me that I was worthy of business leadership beyond the role I was in at the time as a communications professional. And for what it's worth, I do think those extracurricular activities can be very empowering and additive to the development journey that you're on professionally. So wanted to share that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Just
Oh,
throw
Aaron, you
in,
want someone?
yeah, just a couple quick things I think to build off. I think very good points by both Mike and Sarah. The first is intellectual curiosity, right? You have to have a desire to learn and a willingness to learn. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about my job, right? That's where I get a lot of energy, is from getting to talk to really smart people, ask some questions, learn, come in with a sense of humility because I don't know anything and they know a lot. And that's very exciting to me. And I think that will serve you well in the organization. I think it will fuel that your credibility in the organization. Because people, what are they, what's the fastest way to get somebody to warm up to you is ask them about themselves and what they do and what's important to them, build a relationship. But you can also learn a hell of a lot that will pay off for you in future interactions within your organization. And I would say, kind of building on Mike's point about, and I liked how he phrased some of it, the way I've always thought about a lot of the social and personal IQ sort of things is to be a great, and I stole this from the dog whisperer guy, whatever Cesar Chavez or whatever the guy's name is dogs are great students of human behavior. Like my dog knows, like he lays in bed until the exact moment when I'm about 5 seconds from leaving the bedroom in the morning. He's not going to waste any time. He knows all of my habits in the morning. He's got me figured out 100%. And I think that if you translate that into the corporate environment, understanding people's behavior and being able to watch a room and understand the dynamics between people and watch for patterns, watch for trends, will help you figure out who you might want to be cautious around, who might have some friction, and you better be careful that you don't get caught in the friction. There's just a lot of those moments that nobody thinks about that are almost behind the scenes or subtextual to the normal interactions of an organization. And once and by being savvy about those, A, you will survive, and B, you will thrive. So I think about the dog. If you have a dog, and I know Sarah, you were saying you have a dog, I have two. So like I watch my dogs, they watch me a lot more. And I think I watch people a lot, and I'm very intrigued by people and how they interact. So I think those are some things that may help.
Yeah, that's a great segue to our next question from Daniel Kramer that says, well, how do you guys listen to your employees? Like you talk about observing, you talk about the interaction, but how do you listen to your employees?
I'll start. There's a number of different avenues that we have to do that. You can start with the broad-based and more formal. We do formalized surveys on a periodic basis throughout our business to get a sense for how people are feeling on a variety of different topics. My team plays an active role in this because they are embedded in different portions of the business, whether it be our operations in Mexico, our wine and spirits organization in San Francisco and Napa, or our beer headquarters in Chicago even. Part of what we talk about is making sure that we're getting out of our four walls, going out into the business and connecting with our people. And if you do that and gain their trust, a lot of what Aaron said, it's all rooted in relationship. They will give you information, access to information and perspective that others in the organization might not get, that they might not share with leaders up their reporting chain for a variety of different reasons, that allow you to bring perspective back that can allow you to close some of the gaps and address some of the issues that are out there. And the other thing that has been hugely impactful, which is a fairly new area of responsibility for me now being our chief diversity officer, is leveraging our business resource groups. And in fact, I've had two really impactful conversations with two different groups. one group is our business resource group for Asian Americans. And it's, following the recent killings in recent killings in Atlanta and the string of absurd violence against Asian Americans in this country. For me, that's not an experience that I am very close to, but intellectually curious about, and hopefully we all are. And so we took an opportunity because we felt like this was something that needed to be addressed that we hadn't yet addressed as a company. We're trying to figure out the right way to do it and wanted perspective on how people were feeling and what might be most appropriate. I had an eye-opening conversation with the leaders of that business resource group that created this, I would call it proximity, right? They helped me understand the view from their street corner. And when I started understanding that, we've got Asian American leaders in the business that have gone out to restaurants and been spat at fairly recently, by the way, or that some of them and their families are afraid to actually go outside or have their kids walk to school for fear that they might be targeted. Like, to me, it just hit me at a different level. It's one thing to watch it on the news, but when there's a member of your family that's being impacted and you start to hear that stuff, it becomes a little more real. And that allows you to actually work with them to do something to make it one step better, to lend support. I had the same sort of conversation with our African-American business resource group today in response to the most recent killing in Minnesota. And, we're preparing for, the pending outcome of the George Floyd trial as well. And so, variety of different mechanisms to engage employees, gain some perspective, and, hopefully that allows us to serve them better, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that fuel our success.
Our next question, and thank you. We've got about 4 more that are already listed, so they have a lot of good questions they want to ask. How do you think our current financial environment is affecting how firms are navigating marketing and communications needs? We saw a shift in the downsize in these business critical roles last year. Do you guys believe that this trend will continue? And that comes from Leslie Zimmerman.
I can take that one. I think 2020 and 2021 year to date have more than called upon the communications function in really meaningful ways. One of the nicest things our CEO has said to our team last year was she referred to our communications team as the glue that kept the company together throughout 2020. And I think as we, like many other companies, made tough choices around downsizing, the communications function grew. And I think it's a reflection of the just the challenging work that we have to navigate and the importance of it in this period of time. And so I'm very optimistic that budgets are not shrinking, they're expanding in our space, provided we're doing all the right things and contributing in meaningful ways.
Absolutely. Aaron, I've got a question that was directed at you. Unfortunately, it was an anonymous attendee, so I can't give you a name. But they said, can you talk more about what you do in your job that relates to sustainability?
Sure. If, and look, I'm going to define sustainability right or wrong as ESG, maybe just to simplify it into something we can all get our heads around, because otherwise I think sustainability gets a little perhaps unwieldy and we're trying to nail jelly to the wall or something like that. So, from that perspective, if you think about the role of an organization and the stakeholders that we should care about, the role of a public organization is to create value for its shareholders. And when the shareholders have a specific interest in a topic, and they, as we talked about, have a significant growing interest, we become a conduit to ensure that we are hearing what's on the minds of our shareholders, what's salient, relevant to them, and then responding in an appropriate fashion. And that's the difference between potentially billions of dollars of shareholder value lost or gained. That's the difference between the makeup and quality of our shareholder base, which matters a lot. It's the make or break potentially between, an activist, run at our company over some issue that could have been dealt with in a more civilized fashion. I can tell you we had some legacy, for instance, we had some sort of legacy governance items that in our bylaws that were not appealing to an organization called ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services, which is sort of a judge and jury to some degree over all of these ESG components, and they score you and they rate you and they vote a lot of investors' shares. And so we were getting withhold vote recommendations from ISS for our nominees for a board, which is a big deal, right? You don't want your board members not to get voted in or to get kind of low voting totals. So I kind of have to dial for votes. We figure out who aligns to ISS, who votes that way. I've got to call them up, talk them through it, and hopefully, and was able to recover millions of votes from some large shareholders to help with that process. And the quid pro quo was that we would fix all that stuff, and we did. So there's definitely a close alignment between what we do in sustainability, called ESG. The person who runs that group, who's become a really good friend and a great partner, his direction to his team is investor relations is your top customer. Just, you guys have to align to them, you have to serve them, you have to make sure they have what they need, and be very close partners. And we're really glad for that support.
Thank you, Aaron. Now this is open, so back to the floor. Can you tell me about a time in your career in which you struggled and had to be resilient? How did you handle this? And what did you overcome? What did you do to overcome that phase? And what did you learn from it? This comes to us from Fabian Gehring.
All right, I'll go while you guys ponder. I saw this in the Q&A. I've been trying to think about something, and there are probably 50 struggles. But when I was at Sara Lee, I was there for 11 years. When I started, the stock price was about $28. I never got above $28 in 11 years. It went as low as $14. We pretty much bungled about anything we could get our hands on, and it was a very good learning experience, right? I'll say it that way. But along the way, the CEO was under a lot of pressure, and one of the things that happened was the CFO retired. We had a new CFO come in, and it became very apparent to me that part of the agenda of the new CFO was to figure out what role IR did or didn't have in some of the languishing of the share price. And it was very apparent to me that this individual, I felt like, was out for me and kind of had an agenda. And so what was I going to do? You can run from the fight, or you can kind of take the fight back. And, I really struggled through that. I relied on people I worked with to help me through it. But what I did is I said, you can come for me, but you will not defeat me, because I know that it's not me, and I will prove my worth to you. And was able to do that, to where I had a very good relationship with this person ultimately. And I think this person ultimately valued me quite a bit for my role. But I'd really turn his opinion, and I think it was kind of change a predisposition when they came in. So that was really challenging, to have been there for a long time, fought all those battles, and then kind of have the organization or people within the organization question me on that. So try to turn the negative into a positive, I guess, in that story.
Okay. All right. So from Evelyn Botello, she asked a question near and dear to my heart. She says, how would you say your communication style of leadership changes across the different industries you served, or does it change? Who wants to jump on that one?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Having the dramatic pause. It's a good question. I'm reflecting, because I don't think it has changed for me. When I was, it's interesting because Grainger Industrial Supplies, previous to going to CDW, I did have another opportunity present itself in the same industry. And as I went through that interview process, I didn't feel as though my communication style aligned with the leadership team. So while it was a big job and a great opportunity, I turned it down because I didn't feel like there was a connection there. CDW is a different industry, but in my interview process, meeting with the executive team and feeling like I was able to be authentic to who I am strengths, weaknesses, just that connection and feeling like I didn't have to change my style is ultimately what drew me there. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think for me it's knowing where you can be your authentic best and not have to change your style too radically to fit in, if that makes sense.
So leaning to your authenticity. All right, we got two more questions that we'll handle, and then Nancy will wrap it up from there. From Idris Stansberry says, I love what Mike explained about understanding the business first and foremost to leverage unique perspective in an organization. As a young CMO currently building the foundation at a global tech startup, what can I do to become a well-versed communications leader for my organization internally and externally?
So as it relates to, I'm reading this as how do I gain perspective, understand various elements of the business so that I can be a well-versed communications leader. It's interesting, and if I'm reading that right, I'll answer from that perspective. You're never going to have time to do this. I think you're going to make time to do it, to immerse yourself in different areas of the business, to engage with people in different areas of the business, to ask a lot of questions that get them talking and sharing perspective. When people see what I've experienced is that when people see a sincere desire and intent to understand their worlds, not only will they make time for you, but they will extend themselves for you. And so I'll just, and it can lead to some pretty cool things. So I'll give you one quick story of the way that it helped me at Constellation. So I had just joined the company. I was new to the beverage alcohol industry. I didn't really understand what we did or how beer, wine, spirits were marketed. I was looking to understand and find different ways to make an impact. And so, what I did is I made an effort to go out and experience our different activations, right? And so we have a very fun business. So one of the things that we do is, Corona is a big sponsor of boxing, right? So I connected with our marketing team, got tickets to one of the big boxing matches in Vegas, and I flew out there by myself, by the way, just to see and experience, and so that I could gain perspective and be smarter about the business. Well, interesting thing happened along the way. So as I'm boarding the plane, who do I see in first class? It's the president of the beer business. Hey, Mike, how you doing? I'm Bill. How you doing? Didn't know he was there. Seven rows back, it's the chief commercial officer for the business, the beer business. Bruce, how you doing? So I'm the back row of the plane, right next to the restrooms. So we land in Vegas. I'm the last, like one of the last people off the plane. Lo and behold, they waited for me, which I had never had happen before, because usually execs are kind of whisked off and in their car and they're on their way. They waited for me. They said, do you have a ride to the hotel? I said, no. They said, Brian, come with us. We check in. They said, do you have lunch plans? I said, no, I'm here by myself. Come with us. And I had 2 hours of unobstructed time with the president and chief commercial officer of the business. And I'm just peppering them with questions, right? They have the history, they have the experience, they understand the intricacies. I'm just soaking this up, and it's awesome. And I'm figuring we're done. And that by itself would have been success for me for that trip. Then they say, you got dinner plans? I'm like, no. They're like, we're having dinner at a steak restaurant. I don't meet us there at 7. Okay. So I go there, and lo and behold, it's not just the president, chief commercial officer. It's one of the president of one of our biggest distributors. It's our CEO and his wife, right? And now I have dinner with a bigger captive audience that is giving me not only more perspective, but exposure. And it was awesome. And then I go to the boxing match, and then I'm immersed with our marketing team that then sees me, hey, the guy from Chicago, right? And they embrace me, and they're showing me things, getting different exposure, pointing out different things, staging areas, all that sort of stuff that I would have never picked up on my own. And not only did that experience benefit me, but back in the office, then people talked about it. And then I was engaged by different groups, and I had relationships with people that would not only share information, but then I could go to for perspective. And so for me, the key to it, it's all rooted in people and relationships, but making a sincere effort, having a curiosity to go out, make time to engage people in the business, people on the front lines that get it done. to understand various aspects, to ask questions, because it will have more benefits at the end of the day than you can actually imagine.
I think we've run out of time. Nancy, back over to you.
Okay, and that's too bad because our last question was, do you have any critical advice for incoming students? And I'm sure that you guys have had lots of advice for incoming students, but we will have to end here. I do want to thank all of you for a very enlightening conversation and for the authenticity with which you shared your experiences and stories. And so I hope we can do some more of this going forward. This is the kind of thing that I think helps students, but it also helps discuss and describe what's happening in the overall communications and investor relations world that you live in. And that's so important for where we are today as a society. So thank you, and wish all of you a very, very nice rest of your evening.
Great to see you guys.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks,
Thank you
Ernest.
very much.
Have a great night.